Throughout history, complex societies have risen to remarkable heights, only to fade gradually from prominence. Understanding how this happens requires looking beyond dramatic events to examine the slower processes that weaken civilizations from within. Most civilizations do not collapse suddenly. Instead, they undergo long periods of stress during which multiple systems begin to falter. These stresses often build so gradually that people living through them may not recognize the scale of change occurring around them. Environmental factors frequently play a foundational role. When populations grow beyond what local resources can sustain, food production becomes strained. Agricultural land may be overworked, leading to soil depletion. Water sources can diminish through overuse or shifting climate patterns. Evidence indicates that several ancient societies experienced decades of reduced rainfall, which gradually undermined their ability to feed growing populations. Economic structures also become vulnerable over time. As civilizations expand, they require increasingly sophisticated trade networks and administrative systems. When these networks are disrupted, whether through resource scarcity or increased costs, the effects ripple throughout society. Research points to periods when maintaining infrastructure and supply lines became prohibitively expensive, draining resources that might have been used to address other problems. Administrative complexity itself can become a burden. Governments grow larger to manage expanding territories and populations. This growth requires more officials, more record-keeping, and more taxation. Historians suggest that some civilizations reached a point where the cost of maintaining bureaucracy exceeded the benefits it provided. Decision-making slowed. Corruption sometimes increased. The systems designed to hold society together began instead to weigh it down. Social cohesion often weakens as inequality deepens. When wealth concentrates among a small elite, the majority may lose faith in existing institutions. Evidence from archaeological sites shows widening gaps between rich and poor in several declining civilizations. As trust erodes, cooperation becomes more difficult. Communities that once worked together fragment into competing groups, each protecting their own interests. Military and defensive costs can drain resources as well. Maintaining security across large territories requires significant investment. As threats increase or resources diminish, the proportion of wealth devoted to defense often grows. This leaves less available for infrastructure, education, or responding to environmental challenges. The very act of defending a civilization can paradoxically weaken its foundations. Loss of adaptability represents another critical factor. Successful civilizations often develop rigid traditions and established ways of solving problems. When circumstances change, these once effective approaches may no longer work. Yet institutions resist change, especially when powerful groups benefit from existing arrangements. Historians point to examples where societies continued failed policies long after their inadequacy became apparent. Technology and knowledge can also be lost during periods of decline. As economic conditions worsen, fewer resources support scholarship, innovation, or the training of skilled workers. Libraries may fall into disrepair. Craft traditions disappear when apprentices cannot be supported. Each generation may know slightly less than the one before, a gradual erosion of capability that compounds over time. Trade connections that once brought prosperity can become sources of vulnerability. When civilizations depend heavily on distant resources or markets, disruptions in those networks create cascading problems. Archaeological evidence shows that some societies experienced sudden shortages when trade routes failed, leaving them unable to obtain materials essential to their way of life. Population movements add additional pressure. Whether driven by climate change, conflict, or opportunity, the migration of peoples can strain receiving societies. Integrating newcomers requires resources and adaptation. When this occurs during periods of existing stress, it can overwhelm institutional capacity. Evidence indicates that several civilizations faced significant challenges managing demographic shifts during their decline. Disease sometimes accelerates decline, though it rarely acts alone. Epidemics spread more easily in stressed populations with inadequate nutrition or sanitation. When disease strikes a society already weakened by other factors, recovery becomes more difficult. Labor shortages may result, further reducing economic productivity and the ability to maintain infrastructure. Religious or ideological shifts can reflect and deepen uncertainty. As traditional beliefs fail to explain deteriorating conditions, people may lose confidence in established institutions. New movements emerge, sometimes offering hope, but other times fragmenting society further. Research suggests that periods of decline often coincide with significant religious or philosophical change. Urban centers, once symbols of civilization's achievements, may shrink or be abandoned. As rural areas struggle, fewer people can be supported in cities. Trade declines, reducing the flow of goods and ideas. Buildings fall into disrepair. Eventually, what were once thriving metropolises become less populated, their monuments standing as reminders of former complexity. The process of decline is rarely uniform. Some regions or cities may thrive, even as others fail. Brief recoveries can occur, giving the impression that problems have been solved. But underlying weaknesses often remain, and subsequent shocks find society less resilient than before. Each crisis leaves the civilization slightly more fragile. Writing and record-keeping may diminish during extended decline. As administrative systems weaken, fewer documents are produced or preserved. This creates gaps in the historical record, making it difficult for later scholars to fully understand what occurred. The civilization's own voice grows quieter as its decline progresses. Eventually, what remains may no longer resemble the complex society that existed at its height. Political authority fragments, specialized occupations disappear, population densities fall. The intricate systems that once coordinated millions of people across vast territories break down into smaller, simpler arrangements. This is not necessarily a sudden catastrophe, but rather a transformation that unfolds across generations. Understanding these patterns helps us see civilization not as permanent, but as something requiring continuous effort and adaptation to maintain. The archaeological and historical record shows clearly that complexity itself creates vulnerabilities. Large-scale organization brings benefits, but also introduces dependencies and costs that can become unsustainable. The decline of past civilizations reflects the accumulated weight of many pressures rather than single catastrophic events. Environmental limits, economic strain, administrative burden, social division, and loss of adaptability combined over decades or centuries. While the specific details varied, the underlying pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. These processes unfolded gradually, often beyond the full awareness of those experiencing them, reminding us that even the most powerful societies remain subject to the constraints of their environments and the consequences of their choices.